Have you ever walked into a house and felt like the air was already occupied, like something unseen was watching you from the walls, listening from the corners? Most people laugh when they hear that question. They say it's imagination, nerves, maybe exhaustion from the chaos of moving. But if you've ever felt that strange heaviness, the quiet that hums instead of soothes, then maybe, you already know what I'm talking about. Tonight, I want you to stay with me until the very end of this story. Because what I'm about to tell you isn't a ghost tale pulled from the internet or a rumor shared in the dark. It's real. And if you stay till the last second, I'll tell you the single, unmistakable sign that proves your house isn't empty even when it looks that way. It started like any ordinary move. Boxes stacked in the hallway, the echo of laughter bouncing off bare walls, the smell of fresh paint and possibility. The house stood quietly at the end of a narrow road lined with trees that leaned inward, as if whispering among themselves. To us, it was a dream, the kind of place that seemed too good for the price we paid. The realtor had been unusually eager, speaking fast, avoiding questions that deserved longer answers. When she handed over the keys, she said only one thing: "You'll love it here. The house has a memory." At the time, we thought she meant charm. We didn't understand what she really meant until it was far too late. The first night was quiet, too quiet. The silence didn't feel peaceful, it felt present. We tried to fill it with noise, unpacking, playing music, laughing just a little too loudly. But the sound didn't travel right. It felt like the walls were swallowing our voices whole. Every corner had a shadow that seemed to linger longer than it should. When the lights were off, the darkness wasn't empty, it was layered, alive. By morning, that feeling faded. Sunlight spilled through the windows, and the house looked innocent again, ordinary. The kind of place that could hold family dinners, birthdays, Sunday mornings. We convinced ourselves that the strange unease of the night before had been nothing but exhaustion. After all, moving is stressful. Brains play tricks. Then, while unpacking in the hallway, I noticed something carved faintly beneath the chipped wallpaper. It wasn't writing, not at first glance, just uneven scratches. But when I leaned closer, the words became clear. 2 words, etched deep into the plaster beneath every layer of paint and paper: "Still here." I called my partner to show them. They laughed it off, said it must have been from a child, or maybe a bored teenager before the last renovation. We both shrugged. But there was something about those words, something too deliberate, too repeated. When we peeled the wallpaper further back, we found the same words again, older, faded, but still visible. Still here. We didn't talk about it again. Not that day. Not that week. We wanted to believe the house was just old, full of stories like any other. But every night since we moved in, I've felt the same presence behind me when I walk down the hall, quiet, patient, listening. And no matter how many lights I leave on, the shadows always return to the same corners. You might think this is all coincidence, all nerves. That's what I thought too before I started hearing the breathing. The following days passed in an uneasy kind of calm. Boxes emptied one by one, rooms took shape. And the echo of emptiness began to fade beneath furniture, curtains, and new smells of life. It almost felt normal, almost. Every time we opened a cabinet or walked into a new space, it felt as though the house was quietly observing, memorizing our habits, adjusting itself to fit us. It started subtly. A misplaced key, a glass missing from the counter, a door slightly ajar when I knew I'd shut it tight. Little things small enough to ignore, easy enough to blame on distraction. But it didn't stop. Each day, another small inconsistency appeared, just enough to catch attention, never enough to prove anything. By the third evening, I realized something strange about the temperature inside. No matter how high we set the thermostat, the air remained cold, not sharp, but heavy, the kind of cold that sank through clothes and lingered on your skin. and it was worse in one particular room, the upstairs guest room. The one space we hadn't finished unpacking. The door stayed closed most of the time, and whenever I passed it, a faint draft brushed against my legs, as if something inside exhaled softly through the gap beneath the door. That night, when I went to turn off the lights, I noticed the door was open. Not wide, just a few inches. A sliver of blackness peered through, darker than the hallway itself. I shut it, quietly, without thinking much of it. But in the middle of the night, it creaked open again. My partner heard it too. We both sat up, hearts pounding in the dark. The sound wasn't loud, but it was slow, like fingers trailing across old wood. The kind of noise you can feel even when it stops. The next morning, I checked the hinges, the floorboards, the draft from the window, anything that might explain it. But nothing did. The window was sealed, the latch firm. Yet somehow, the door always found a way to open on its own. A few days later, we met one of the neighbors, an older man named Richard. He'd been watching us from across the street, the kind of watch that wasn't rude but cautious. He introduced himself politely, asked the usual questions, how long we'd been there, how we liked the neighborhood. But when I mentioned which house was ours, his expression faltered for just a second. Then he nodded slowly and said, "Ah, the Walker place." I didn't know who the Walkers were. But when I asked, he said quietly, they lived there before the Stevensons. Before them, too, I think. Nice family. Didn't stay long. There was something behind his voice, a memory he didn't want to revisit. Before I could ask more, his wife called him from the porch, and he excused himself, almost relieved to leave. That evening, when we got home, we found the guest room light turned on. Neither of us had been upstairs since morning. The bulb glowed a faint, yellow hue, but it wasn't the light itself that bothered me, it was what I saw beneath it. There was a handprint on the inside of the window. A small one. Smudged from the inside, as though someone had stood there pressing against the glass. We didn't have children. We didn't have visitors. And yet, that night, I swear I heard faint laughter echoing through the vents, the kind that sounds like a memory of joy, twisted by time. My partner tried to convince me it was the plumbing or the wind, and I wanted to believe that. But deep down, I knew the truth neither of us could admit aloud: the house was beginning to wake up. And it was learning how to make itself heard. I tried to forget about the handprint. I really did. For days, I buried myself in the normal routines of life: work, chores, small talk, the mundane rhythm that people cling to when they don't want to face something they can't explain. But the house didn't let me forget. It never does. Every morning, I'd find something new out of place. A photo frame turned face down. A chair slightly pulled out from the table. Sometimes, I'd wake to faint knocks on the wall behind my bed, 3 at a time, spaced like a heartbeat. Always 3. One evening, as I was cleaning out a cabinet in the hallway, I found a small box wedged behind the bottom shelf. It was wrapped in paper so brittle it crumbled when I touched it. Inside were photographs, faded, yellowed, and water-damaged. Families. Children. Different faces, different times, but always the same house behind them. Ours. There were no dates, no names, no notes except for one photo, tucked behind the rest. It showed a woman standing in front of the house, holding a little girl's hand. Both were smiling, but something about the image felt wrong. The woman's eyes were blurred, as though she'd been moving when the picture was taken, except the rest of her was perfectly still. And behind them, in the upstairs window, there was a shape. A dark outline. Human, but too tall, too thin. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about the name the neighbor had mentioned, the Walker place. So, I started digging. Old records, property deeds, archives, anything I could find online. It turns out this house had changed owners more times than any property in the area. Families moved in and out in less than a year. Some sold it for half its worth. Others simply left. A few never filed a sale at all. The further I searched, the darker the trail became. In 1984, a man named Charles Walker bought the property with his wife and daughter. Local papers reported that one night, without warning, the house caught fire. Only part of it burned, the rest was left standing, untouched. The wife and daughter were never found. Charles was discovered in the basement, sitting upright, unburned, eyes wide open, as though he'd seen something before he died. The official cause was listed as smoke inhalation. But the photos showed no soot, no burn marks. Just a man who looked like he'd died from pure terror. Over the years, more families came and went. Each left quietly, without explanation. But one thing stayed constant: strange complaints from neighbors. Lights flickering at odd hours. Voices in the yard when no one was home. Shadows moving across the windows long after the house was empty. I wanted to tell my partner what I'd found, but I didn't know how. How do you say our house has a history of eating people without sounding insane? So, I kept quiet. But the house must have known I'd learned its secret. Because that night, it finally spoke back. It started with a whisper from the upstairs hall. I was walking past the guest room when I heard it, faint, but clear enough to understand. A woman's voice. "Don't let him in." I froze. The room was dark, door half open like always. But this time, the cold air spilling out wasn't just a draft. It carried the smell of something old, like wet earth and dust. I backed away, step by step, and shut the door. But when the latch clicked, something on the other side scratched the wood. Slow, deliberate. Like fingernails tracing a message. The next morning, when I opened that door again, the walls had changed. Faint letters etched into the paint, the same words that had haunted the wallpaper downstairs. Still here. That was when I realized something terrible. The scratches weren't new. They'd been there before. The paint had simply covered them up. And if the voice had said, "Don't let him in," then whoever he was already inside. After the night I heard the whisper, the house changed. Not suddenly, but in the small ways that slowly break a person down. At first, it was the sounds. The soft scratching in the walls became footsteps above us. Then whispers behind doors that hadn't been opened in years. Sometimes, when I'd walk into the kitchen late at night, I'd feel the air shift like someone had just stepped out of the room a second before I entered. My partner tried to keep things normal. They started sleeping with the light on, cooking at strange hours, pretending not to hear the knocks that came from inside the walls. But I saw it in their eyes, that same dread that kept me awake. The kind that doesn't need proof because it's already felt. We both started having the same dream. A door that didn't exist in the real house. A long, narrow hallway beyond it, lined with photographs. All of them showed people we didn't recognize until one night, we did. Because there, at the very end of the hall, was us. The photo was fresh. New. After that, sleep became dangerous. Every time I drifted off, I'd wake somewhere else, standing in the hallway, the guest room, once even at the foot of the stairs with my hand resting on the front door handle. I'd have no memory of how I got there. Only the faint, cold feeling of fingers brushing the back of my neck before I opened my eyes. The air in the house grew heavier each day. Our clocks started freezing at 3:07 a.m., the exact time the Walker fire report said the blaze began all those years ago. The basement light flickered even when it was unplugged. And the smell of smoke, faint but constant, began leaking from the vents. Then came the voices. They no longer whispered. They called. My name. My partner's name. Sometimes they sounded like each other but wrong, stretched, like the words had been dragged through something dark before reaching us. One night, I found my partner standing in the guest room again, staring at the window where that handprint had first appeared. They were pale, trembling. When I asked what they were doing, they turned slowly, eyes glassy, and said, "She's crying again." I looked toward the window, and there in the reflection stood a woman. Thin, drenched in shadow, her eyes wide and shining. Her mouth moved, but no sound came out. And then, just as quickly, she was gone. We left the room, slammed the door, and didn't open it again. But from that night on, the crying never stopped. It started softly around midnight and grew louder until sunrise. It didn't come from any one place, it came from everywhere. The pipes, the walls, the floors beneath our feet. Sometimes, I'd hear her humming a low, broken lullaby that didn't belong to anyone alive. I tried recording it once. But when I played it back, there was no sound. Just silence, and faintly, beneath that silence, a single word. Stay. It wasn't a plea. It was a command. The next day, the front door wouldn't open. The locks turned, the hinges groaned, but it was as if the wood itself refused to move. The windows, too, sealed from the inside. Even our phones lost signal. The house was closing itself. That evening, the temperature dropped so low our breath fogged in front of us. We huddled in the living room, surrounded by the dim orange glow of candles, afraid to speak. Every few minutes, a sound echoed from somewhere deep below, the slow drag of something heavy across the floorboards. Then, from the darkened hallway, came a voice. Low. Calm. Familiar. My own voice. It said, "Come downstairs." That's when I realized the house wasn't haunted by them anymore. It was haunted by us. Have you ever felt a house breathe? Not the creaks of old wood or the hum of pipes, but an actual breath. The slow inhale and exhale of something alive, ancient, and patient. That's what I heard the night it happened. It began at 3:07 a.m. again. I woke to the sound of my name, not whispered this time, but spoken clearly. It came from the hallway. My partner was already awake, sitting up, their eyes fixed on the bedroom door. "You heard it too," they said. Their voice was trembling. The air was heavy with smoke. Not enough to see, but enough to taste. The smell of ash drifted through the vents, mixed with something else, something sweet and rotting. I took a step toward the door, but the floorboards beneath my feet felt soft, like they were pulsing. We didn't speak again. We just moved slowly down the hall toward the guest room. The crying had stopped. That was the worst part. The silence was unnatural, like the house was waiting. The door to the guest room was open this time. Inside, the window was covered in condensation from the inside, and written across it, in uneven letters, was a single word. Home. I turned to my partner, but they weren't behind me anymore. The room felt smaller, the shadows thicker. I called out their name, but it came out muffled, like the walls were swallowing my voice. That's when the mirror across from the bed flickered just once, like a dying light. I stepped closer, and what I saw nearly stopped my heart. The reflection wasn't the room behind me. It was before. It showed the house the night of the fire, flames crawling up the wallpaper, smoke spilling through the halls, and a woman clutching something close to her chest. A child. She was screaming, running toward the same window where I now stood. But the window wouldn't open. The glass glowed white with heat. She pressed her hand against it, leaving that same print we'd seen from the first night. Then she turned toward the mirror, eyes wide, and I realized she could see me. She screamed again, but not in fear. In rage. Because I was standing in her home. In her place. The mirror cracked. Once. Twice. Then shattered completely, revealing behind it not a wall, but a staircase leading down into the dark. I don't know why, but I followed. Maybe it was the voice calling again. Maybe I already knew there was no leaving. The basement was colder than death. Every step echoed like I was walking deeper into a throat. The walls were damp, covered in ash and soot. And then in the center I saw them. The family. The walkers. Or what was left of them. They stood together, motionless, burned, blackened shapes locked in the moment they died. But their faces were wrong. Their eyes were open. Watching me. Behind them, the shadows shifted. A figure stepped forward. Her. The woman from the mirror. She was clearer now, almost human, her face half burned, half beautiful. Her voice came from everywhere. "You moved in," she said softly. "You took what was ours." Then she smiled. "So we took what was yours." I turned to run, but the stairs were gone. The walls around me began to pulse, the wood creaking like it was alive. From above, I heard my partner screaming a single, sharp sound that was cut off mid-breath. And then, I wasn't standing anymore. The floor had opened beneath me, swallowing me into the house itself. I felt it pressing against my skin, pulling me down, whispering in my ear, "Stay." When I opened my eyes, I was back in the living room. The fire was gone. The smoke was gone. The house looked exactly the way it did the first day we arrived. Except for one thing. There were new photographs on the wall. Of me. And my partner. And outside the window, faintly just barely visible through the glass, was a new handprint. Fresh. The house had found its family again. They found the house months later. Or at least, they thought they did. A real estate agent had gone out to check why no one was answering calls or emails. The neighbors said they hadn't seen anyone in weeks, just the faint flicker of lights every night at the same time, always ending at 3:07 a.m. When the agent entered, everything looked perfectly normal. The furniture was untouched, the dishes clean, the floor swept. There was even a faint smell of candles, the kind you'd light to make a home feel warm. But there was no sign of us. No luggage, no clothes, no car in the driveway. Just emptiness. Except, on the living room wall, there were photographs. Hundreds of them. Some old, yellowed, some new. But every single one showed the same thing: couples, families, people standing inside that house, smiling for the camera. And behind every group, barely visible in the corner of the photo, was a dark, burned figure. Watching. The police investigated for weeks. No bodies were found. The case was marked as unresolved disappearance. Eventually, the house went back on the market. Again. And it sold. Again. People never learn. They never believe the stories. They tell themselves, it's just a house. They say the same thing we said: the noise is the pipes, the whispers are the wind, the feeling of being watched is just in your head. But it's not. Because that house isn't empty. It never was. It breathes. It waits. And every time someone new walks through the door, it starts over: the hum in the walls, the smell of smoke, the faint whisper at 3:07 a.m. And somewhere, deep inside, beneath the foundation and the ash, are the ones who stayed. The ones who never left. Sometimes, on quiet nights, if you walk past that old street and listen closely, you can still hear them. A faint voice behind the walls. A soft knock under the floor. And sometimes, a whisper. Not asking for help. Just saying hello. Because they're still there. Watching. Waiting for someone else to move in.